Hey there, Jody here. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, on my channel I talk about Broadway books and television. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving some winter book recommendations for books that I have read that I really liked and enjoyed reading that take place specifically in the wintertime season. So without any further ado, let's get on to some winter book recommendations. I'm even wearing my Elf the Musical t-shirt, because Elf is like a seasonal movie that many of us watch in the holiday seasons. Was made into a musical. I saw this on Broadway in 2010 and it was a great show. And now moving on to winter book recommendations. So first up is romance. So I have two books on this list. The first book is Next Year by Sophie Cousens. This is also a book in Good Morning America's book club. Just thought I'd mention that in case you're a fan of books in book clubs such as I. So here we go. So this time next year is about Minnie Cooper and Quinn Hamilton, who were both born on New Year's Eve in 1990 at the same hospital in London. That year, the hospital was giving away a cash prize to whichever baby was the first baby born. Minnie was the first, while Quinn was the second. Over the years, Minnie has always wondered about this Quinn Hamilton. She's wondered if she had won that cash prize instead of Quinn, how much different her life could have possibly have been. And then on both of their 30th birthdays, they randomly bump into each other. They start to talk, and Minnie just finds herself not really being much of a fan of this Quinn Hamilton. So after they're done talking, they go their separate ways, and Minnie's like, well, that was something, and she kind of moved on. But then they both randomly keep bumping into each other time and time again, and once Minnie starts to really get to know Quinn and be around him more, she starts to warm up to him and see that there's much more to him than meets the eye. I absolutely love this romance. It's so incredibly sweet and lovely and just heartwarming, and I just love it so much. This book technically doesn't take place only in the wintertime season, but it does start on New Year's Eve, and it does end on New Year's Eve. So the story takes place throughout a whole year, and the winter season is involved at some point in this story, so I thought I'd include it on this list because it's just like the sweetest story ever, and it's actually the first book that I read in 2025. Just a fun fact of what was my first book that I read this year. But I really love this book a lot, and I had to include it on this list. So also, I forgot to mention, a lot of the books I'll be talking about today have book adaptations, so I'll kind of like let you know when that is, and this is one of those times. This Time Next Year was adapted into a film. I watched the film. I have reviewed it on my channel in case you're curious more of my thoughts on it, but I'll just briefly go over it now. As far as film adaptations go, this one was not at all good in my opinion, I sadly have to say. The book, the characters were just so three-dimensional, and like you really got a good understanding of who these characters were. Minnie and Quinn's relationship in the book was so incredibly sweet, and it had like many layers too. When they were falling in love, it was very believable in the book. You really felt that they loved one another. Whereas in the film, the characters, in my opinion, were just very one-dimensional, and the story felt very rushed. And so because of that, Minnie and Quinn's relationship just didn't, their love for one another just didn't come across as believable like it did in the book, because the story felt so incredibly rushed. And so because of that, I just never bought like Minnie and Quinn's love story in the film like I did in the book. Because like in the film, when they're like, I love you, and making it seem like they're in love, I didn't buy it. It was just unbelievable in the film. And so that's my 2 cents on the film. That being said, if I read a book and there was a film adaptation and I just heard someone say that it wasn't good, I myself would still want to check it out and see how I like it. So I still encourage you to check out the film after reading the book. So now moving on to the next romance on the list, which is something from Tiffany's by Melissa Hill. A single father who is traveling to New York City for the holiday season with his daughter and his girlfriend. At some point, he goes to Tiffany's to pick up a present for his girlfriend. And then the other part of the story is about a woman who is also traveling to New York City for the holiday season with her boyfriend. And at some point, her boyfriend goes to Tiffany's by himself to pick something up for her. And what happens next is an accidental exchange of the two gifts. And I'll just leave it there because I don't want to give anything else away about the story. I love this book so much. It's kind of like an emotional rom-com. It's just such a sweet story. Like, this is a book that I never hear anyone talking about. I mean, it's very possible this book was very talked about when it first came out, but I just don't hear many people talking about it anymore. So I knew I had to include this book on this list because it's just like the best. Another book that has a film adaptation, which is on Amazon Prime, and this is definitely an adaptation that very much lives up to the book. So you have a really good adaptation to watch after reading the book. Moving on to the mystery thrillers, which I'm only going to be talking about one here, which is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney, which is about a couple who I believe live in London, and they're kind of like at a crossroads in their relationship where they're not really sure if they want to break up or stay together. Then the wife wins a prize at work for a trip for two to the Scottish Highlands at this like really fancy hotel. And so they go and they travel to this hotel, but as they're making their way there, just a huge snowstorm starts, and they're not really sure if they're going to make it, but they eventually do. And when they get to this hotel, they're very taken aback by what they see, which is that this building that this hotel is in looks like it's been abandoned for decades, and there's no one else in sight around except for the two of them. Normally, under different circumstances, they would get back in their car and go home, but because the weather is so incredibly bad, they kind of have no choice but to go into this hotel and, at least spend the night. Once they get into the hotel, strange things start to happen, and I'm just going to leave the overview at that. This is a really, really great mystery thriller. This is one of those books that is very popular and very hyped up, and after reading it, the popularity for this book is very much well deserved because it's just really incredible. Alice Feeney did an absolutely amazing job with this book. The story is told is very much like you're getting pieces of a puzzle the further along you get into the story. You can't really understand how they fit in with one another, but they do, and eventually towards the end of the story, everything gets explained. It's like very much shocking twists and turns along the way before you get there, and it's just so good. And this is a mystery thriller that's like written so incredibly well. It's very deep and profound at times, very existential. The writing's very poetic at times, and it's just such a great mystery thriller. And this is a book that I believe is going to get a television series adaptation on Netflix at some point. I haven't heard much about the adaptation recently, but I believe the last time I checked on it, I did hear that it was going to get a television series adaptation on Netflix. So just thought I'd let you know about that. And now moving on to a literary fiction mystery thriller kind of book, which is Eileen by Ottessa and Moshfegh. So Eileen is about a young woman named Eileen who's 24 years old and lives in a town in Massachusetts in the early 1960s. Eileen is deeply unhappy with her life, and she constantly dreams of running away and starting over somewhere else, but she can never get herself to actually get up and leave. Eileen still lives in the same town she grew up in the same house she grew up in with her father, who drinks constantly and talks down to her. And the only time Eileen is really ever around anyone else other than her father is when she is at work. But even there, she very much keeps to herself. That is until one day when she meets a new coworker named Rebecca, and Eileen is completely and utterly memorized by Rebecca. And Rebecca and her soon become friends. Rebecca ends up inviting Eileen to spend Christmas Eve over at her place, and Eileen is like over the moon excited by this invitation because Eileen doesn't have any friends or any extended family. So getting invited to something is a really big deal for Eileen, and she's very excited by this invitation. But then she gets to Rebecca's home, and Rebecca seems different from the person that she's come to know from work. And Rebecca's home also doesn't seem like the kind of home that Rebecca would live in. Eileen tries not to overlook any of these things. Shortly, though, after getting to Rebecca's home, things go on to take an incredibly dark turn that forever changed the lives of everyone in the story. So Eileen, like I said, I would categorize this as a literary fiction mystery thriller. It's one of the most memorable characters I have ever read about in a book, I think ever, which is obviously the character of Eileen. Eileen is a very unique individual. Very interesting. She's odd. She's weird. Throughout the story, you really get a good understanding of who Eileen is because Eileen narrates the whole entire story from start to finish. You really get a good idea of who Eileen is and how her life got to be at the place that it is when the story starts. I would definitely say this is very much a character-based driven story where the focus is more on the characters than per se a plot. The story also does go at an extremely slow pace for most of the story until the end when it kind of turns into this like intense thriller. Also, this book does have a film adaptation that stars Anne Hathaway as Rebecca and Thomas Mackenzie as Eileen. As far as book adaptations go, this was a pretty good one. I did feel like the film lacked in some ways because Eileen does not narrate the film in the book, so you don't really get to know and understand Eileen as much in the film as you did in the book. But overall, it was a good adaptation, and I would say if you like the book, you'll probably like the film. So now moving on to the thriller on this list, which is No Exit by Taylor Adams. No Exit is about Darby, who is a college student who is traveling in this like huge snowstorm. Now, Darby has a car that is not really in the best condition to be driving in weather like this, so at some point she has no choice but to stop at this rest stop that she passes by. And so she gets to the rest stop, and there's a few other cars there. She gets inside, and she just says hi to everyone, and then she goes outside again to see if she can get a signal on her phone, which she can't. And so as she's making her way back into the rest stop, she passes by this van, and there's a hand that appears in one of the windows of the van and then disappears a moment later. Darby walks away, not really sure if she saw what she just saw, but she realizes that if she did see what she just saw, that someone at this rest stop along with her has kidnapped someone and put them in their van. That's basically what the story's about. I don't want to say anything more because I don't want to give anything away about the story. So this is a really good, highly intense suspense and psychological thriller. The story is incredibly written. It goes at such a fast pace, and it's very much also a character-based driven thriller where the characters are very three-dimensional. You really get to understand and know who these characters are. A really well-written story that takes place in this like massive blizzard, and it's just so incredibly good and well done. And this is a book that also does have a film adaptation, which is on Hulu. And as far as film adaptations go, sadly to say, this is, in my opinion, not a good one. The characters, like I said in the book, were very three-dimensional, written very well, and it was like very much a character-based driven thriller, where the characters were the ones moving the story forward. Whereas in the film, the characters are very one-dimensional, and the story is less about the characters and understanding and knowing who they are, and more about just the characters moving the plot of the story forward. I didn't think the adaptation was good at all, but like I said earlier when I talked about this time next year's film adaptation, of which I also didn't like, I encourage you to check out the film adaptation if you're curious about it after reading the book, because like I said, we all have our own opinions, and these ones are just mine. So now moving on to the last book on this list, which is Snowblind by Christopher Golden, which is about this huge, massive blizzard that happens in this town in Massachusetts. And when the storm is over, the people in the town are very different than they were before the storm arrived. This is by far the most amazing and incredible atmospheric book that I've ever read. This is a horror book, and this was the first horror book that I've ever read. I was a little nervous to read it because I wasn't sure if it'd be too scary for me to read. But after reading it, I would say this is definitely more on the psychological scary side, where it's like, if this really happened in real life, it'd be terrifying. But in the book, reading it, I didn't find myself overly scared. So this is a really good atmospheric book, especially to read in the wintertime as the story takes place during this massive blizzard. And everything in this book is so incredibly well described in detail. This is a book that has quite a few characters in it, but I thought the author did a really great job in the story of balancing all the character storylines out like just perfectly. I never felt like it got to a point of like confusion or frustration having to keep up with all these characters. Like I said, there was a really good balance between telling everyone's story in this book. And so yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope I helped you discover a few new books along the way as well. And until next time, bye!